Hello, everyone, and welcome back from the lunch break. I hope you all had a good break, a good lunch, wherever you are joining us from today. We do have participants from all over the world in 50 different countries, so perhaps it wasn't lunchtime for you, it was lunchtime for me. I had a nice lunch, those of us in Europe. But maybe if you're joining at other times, it could have been your dinner or your breakfast. But we're now going to move on to the afternoon panels. And in this next panel, we'll be talking about private sector innovations and engagement for developing CA. Now, agricultural development requires that there is a constant effort made by private companies to innovate and engage in service provisioning so that local, national, and international agribusinesses and corporations in all the relevant sectors play their varying strategic and operation roles. Now, this role of private sector institutions in agricultural development also involves research and innovation and value chain services for effective and inclusive participation of farmers and their institutions. Already, over 200 million hectares of annual cropland has been converted to conservation agriculture, and so has a significant area under perennial systems such as orchards, plantations, and mixed systems involving trees and animals. So how have private companies been involved in this transformation so far, and what will be their role in the future? Let me introduce you to our panelists who are going to be walking us through this today. First, we have Klaus Kunz. He's head of sustainability and business stewardship at the German pharmaceutical and life sciences company Bayer. Juan González Valero, head of sustainable and responsible business at the Swiss agricultural science company Syngenta. We have Anke Kwast, vice president for climate neutral roadmap and business support at the Norwegian chemical company Yara International. And we have Jerome Bandry, Secretary General of the European Agricultural Machinery Industry Association, CEMA. Thank you to all four of our panelists for joining us this afternoon. Klaus, let's start with you. You have a presentation for us. What kind of innovations is Bayer looking at in the CA space?
Thanks a lot, Dave, and also thanks a lot for the invitation to give us the opportunity from Bayer today to show what we have done in the last couple of years, I would say 2 to 3 years. And if I go back 3 years, we were at a very different point of looking into sustainable agriculture. And it was the board deciding 3 years ago that we need to change sustainability from being a topic which is actually more in the public relations space into a topic which has to go to the core of our business operations and also of our innovation and R&D. That came with quite some significant consequences for the way we were looking at sustainability, and we took a step back and started and wondered what are the most important things which we need to address in the future if we want to make agriculture more sustainable, and if we want to include it into our business operations so we can get it to scale and offer farmer new ways to do agriculture. And we landed at 3 things. We said we need to focus on the most pressing topics which need to be dealt with, where the industry needs to step up and everybody else too. So we said it's about climate change. Yes, agriculture plays a role. Agriculture can help, can become part of the solution and not remain part of the problem. But also the loss of biodiversity, and also continuously, of course, the topic which our industry sector has always been talking about, helping to provide enough safe and affordable food everywhere in the world, not only in those countries where there is already enough safe and affordable food. And from that lens, let's see if the system works. Yes, it does. From that lens, we said, here are the 3 commitments which we make at Bayer Crop Science to get started. It's very clear this is not sufficient to solve all the problems in the world, and Bayer cannot do it alone anyway. But if you want to have really a significant focus on preservation, we said we want to help our customers to reduce greenhouse gas emissions on customers' fields by 30%. We also said we want to reduce environmental impact of crop protection by 30%, which is of course not enough to resolve the issue of biodiversity loss, but it's a good start. At least it's what we can do with our portfolio as a first step. And on the other hand, looking at food security and the imminent issue that there's a food security issue, we said we want to step up and support 100 million smallholder farmers around the globe with a specific focus on low and middle income countries. That was not easy to say that and to make those commitments, but the really interesting piece came then when we said, what are now the business models which we can derive, which we can develop to turn this into a valuable model for farmers. And today, of course, I focus on greenhouse gas emissions and conservation agriculture. And I just want to give you a little teaser on where Bayer stands today. Round about, I would say, a year after we were doing the first pilots in that space. And we call it the Bayer Carbon Initiative. It comes along with two ideas, which probably 15 years ago would have had no chance. One is that today big companies like Bayer make commitments to become carbon neutral, and they can't. They cannot be carbon neutral on their own because they will continue to emit. So in the end of the day, there must be a market for offsets. Somebody else needs to put the carbon dioxide back into soil or wherever, which is blown out by big corporations. So there's a market, and we were wondering if farmers could not participate, if they would follow verified protocols, if they would follow a way which is verified and measurable, that they can demonstrate that they are part of the solution, taking carbon out of the air and sequestrating carbon into the soil. Could we create an opportunity for farmers that they can participate in this market? And I think it would be a win for everybody. It would be a win for farmers because apparently you would create like a second value income stream for them. They would switch to more climate-friendly practices, and it would open, it would help the world and the climate overall. So that is one pathway. The other pathway, I would say equally interesting, is that companies try to offset their own emissions to a certain extent, but of course they also want to optimize their own emission profile to the best possible extent. And if I look at Bayer, then our supply chain is for example, chemical suppliers. But if I look at food chain companies, their suppliers are farmers. So sooner or later, also the food chain, we expect, will have expectations to farmers on more climate smart growing practices. We call it the insetting pathway. So from our perspective, both creating carbon credits as an opportunity, but also producing at climate smart practices as another opportunity, should open new avenues and pathways for farmers to create value from adapting climate smart practices. And here's where we are today. We have launched projects and pilots around the world. We have a clear focus in North America where we offer farmers payments for adopting those climate smart practices already today. The number of farmers is growing. We are looking for partners. The same in Latin America, where we are collaborating with Embrapa, the most important research organization in the country, to make sure that what we do also meets the quality standards which will be needed to have a product in the market which is not only for 1 or 2 years, and which is also really living up to carbon sequestration and climate smart practices. In Europe, we have started with many other companies a coalition under the roof of the World Economic Forum, where we really together try to design what is in the European scope, in the European reality, in the European regulatory environment under the Green Deal framework, for example. What are the opportunities which we can collaboratively figure out to help farmers to gain value from those practices, but at the same time to help to drive down carbon and to help to sequester carbon in the soil. And last but not least, I think a project which I personally find also very interesting, because it's quite different from the others, in Asia Pacific, where we help farmers, and we call it the India Sustainable Rice Smallholder Initiative, where we want to help farmers to go out of paddy rice into other growing rice practices. Because in paddy rice, we have tremendous emissions of methane. So it's less a removal of carbon project, but it's an avoidance of emission project. I think it's equally important. And what it shows is that we are trying to go in different geographies, use the opportunities which we have on the ground in the countries, help the farmers where help is possible and needed, and make those turnaround really a reality, and not only stick with commitments, because in the end, I think it's absolutely not enough to talk. We really need to walk, and we need to help farmers to make this transformation, because we cannot expect that farmers are doing it and that they do it at an increased cost with no additional revenue. So this is what I wanted to share today as a teaser. We will see the European Carbon Initiative of Bayer being announced next week. Also, so we are present in all the regions of the world. We are driving this really to a reality, and we hope that we will find many partners, because the challenge is too big that one company could solve it all alone. This is what I wanted to share today. I'm very much looking forward to the other presenters, and looking forward to learn from them, and then also to hopefully receive a couple of burning questions later. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Klaus, for that teaser. Let's turn to Juan next. Juan, what are some of the innovations, and what kind of innovations are Syngenta looking at in the CA space?
Yeah, I think you will have to stop presenting the next presentation.
We have Jerome's presentation up. I see. Let's go to Jerome first. The easiest thing to do will be take Jerome first, since his
Hello, I can try to do Juan's presentation if he does mine, but that would be interesting, I suppose. Hello, Dave, and thanks for the opportunity to contribute and participate today. So I'm the Secretary General of CEMA, which is the association representing European agricultural manufacturers. Our mission, our raison d'etre, is to indeed share expertise with principally European institutions and help shape the legislation that will enable sustainable farming, leveraging the advanced agricultural machinery and solutions. We're a business of about 40 billion euros of production in Europe for a European market of about 26, 28 billion euros every year. So you can already guess that a lot of the things that are developed and produced in Europe will also go to the rest of the world and the rest of the planet. With the manufacturing and distribution, it is an industry of about 300,000 direct jobs. We do from seeding to harvesting, plus livestock management. So basically anything mechanical that needs to support our farmers and contractors in doing their job. This is us. This is our industry. And of course, the basic challenge, as we heard a lot this morning in the first part of the plenary, and I think we're going to continue to hear this during the whole exercise, is a series of global challenges, right? We all know we're going to have more and more people to feed, reaching almost 10 billion people by 2050. And unfortunately, we can only see that we have less and less people that are interested in the farming activity. I mean, just looking at Europe, which is where we focus most, a third of the farm managers are over 65, which is retirement age, right? So it raises a significant number of concerns. We also know that we're having more and more pressures on what is in the toolbox, what tools are available for farmers and contractors and the different people that intervene into that chain to do their job. I think we all agree that there's no silver bullet on how to farm, and there's not one farming. There's a lot of different types of farming, and you don't farm different stuff the same way. But we sure have only one earth. So to us, the only thing that is sure on this slide is technology. We can only get to wherever we want to go with the tools we want to use or the methods we want to use by leveraging technology and mechanization. And if you look how the machines evolved over the years, I mean, we started with the universal machine, was supposed to be the workhorse doing everything on the farm, to bigger, faster, wider. It got smart and connected, and maybe tomorrow it won't need us anymore, right? It'll be autonomous and driven by artificial intelligence. But you can see how technology has helped move forward with the mechanization of agriculture. And frankly, conservation agriculture is nothing new to farmers, and it's nothing new to agricultural machinery manufacturers. But it's true that with the 21st century, and with more and more digitalization and more data being used and more sense making being made out of data, the cultivation methods have further progressed towards conservation agriculture and the three principles that we've heard. So just a couple of words on on technologies or combinations of technologies that enable conservation agriculture. I mean, the fact that we're able to do tillage and seeding at the same time has helped a lot with the development of new machinery and new techniques in this area. The fact that we can also do seeding and fertilization at the same time also helped a lot, because if you're aiming to have as lower disturbance on the ground as possible, you want to do it in as minimum passes as possible. The fact that we have more and more machinery that can be integrated in order to manage the plant cover or the catch crops and make sure that this is completely included in the process is also very much helping, as well as developments like intercropping. We've seen this more and more being developed by our manufacturers, or strip tilling also being one of the technologies. So I don't have the time here to do a deep diving into the technology, but the basic question here is this one. No silver bullet, but we will need mechanization and technology. Because if the goal is to have the minimum soil disturbance as possible, and of course it depends on the conditions, of course it depends on where you are, of course it depends on how you're going to integrate the whole system, you may have a choice between the different technologies out there. Yes, you may still have the need for conventional tillage in some parts of the world or under some conditions, but between minimum tillage, ultra-shallow tillage, or no-till, those direct drilling planters that we have available are really great machinery to support conservation agriculture. It is all with the help of mechanization and technology. So the point I think we should also spend a little bit of time discussing today is that nothing of this can happen without a larger uptake of the smart agriculture technologies, digital farming, smart farming, those type of things, precision farming. And it's not just Europe, it's global. But today, I think the big guys already have it. They have the capacity to invest. They have the ability to understand how to build a system around this. But how do we make it more available for smaller farms? How do we make it more available across the globe? Because those technologies, guidance systems, variable rate applications, precision livestock technologies, or farm management information services, they're available for farms of all sizes. It's a question of uptake. But to have an uptake, we also need the trust. I heard this morning a big plea against the use of data. Well, if we don't have trust on the way to use data, we're not going to have precision farming at all. And you can forget about those developments. This is why the industry, together with all the stakeholders, have come forward with a voluntary code of conduct, defining who owns the data, what you can do with it, what are the terms to put in contractual agreements that can be used between the whole chain. And then I would also end my pitch on the following. And CEMA and the FAO has been working together for quite some time now to mainstream this sustainable agricultural mechanization globally, because too often we're just focused on some parts of the world, but there's a lot that technology can also offer for the whole globe to significantly go forward. If we have trust, technology will be there. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So now let's go to Juan. Juan, can you tell us what kind of innovations Syngenta is looking at for CA? You want to unmute yourself, Juan? There you go.
I am unmuted now. Yes, thanks. And I'm not going to use slides. I think I would just talk over the question in order to get us started. Let me kick it off with already in 2013, we launched our first Good Growth Plan with a clear focus on innovating towards a more sustainable agricultural system and try to see what we can do with our production on the ground. Only 6 years after the launch of the Good Growth Plan, so by 2019, we already had achieved more than what we had committed to. We enhanced biodiversity and soil health on more than 20 million hectares around the globe. And what also was quite remarkable is that we achieved over 30% less fertilizer and pesticide use per unit of crop produced. And we reduced the greenhouse gas emissions by close to 40%, on the reference farm network that we established of more than 1,600 farmers around the globe. So we then actually looked into what we've achieved and what needs to come back. And that's where we really started to see that we need to be even much more specific on and articulated around how we want to actually accelerate our innovations for farmers in nature. And in 2020, we committed to invest 2 billion over the next 5 years to increase agricultural productivity in a sustainable and responsible way to advance the regenerative agriculture. Let me focus on 3 elements that are under this investment commitment and what we are looking at that is really helping. So we are convinced to move towards a much more sustainable conservation or even regenerative agricultural system. The first complex of investments goes towards soil health. And there the technology development, what is at the heart of Syngenta's innovation model, is to look at new biostimulants, for example, that can really improve the plant health and in particular support also the nutrient uptake and become much more water and stress resilient for the crops. So biostimulants is a very important investment area, and you know that we actually acquired Valero, what is one of the leading biostimulant companies around the world, as part of our investment into these technologies. Second, we invest heavily in nutrient efficient traits, nutrient and other traits, but in particular nutrient efficiency, because that's very important to start reducing the greenhouse gas emissions from fertilization in agriculture. This is something that is ongoing, and we already see excellent results in our nutrient efficiency traits. And the last technology that we are really looking at is how to improve root health, be it through the genetics or be it through soil seed treatments, for example, that really support the root health development, and with that provide not only soil but also plant and root health as an outcome. In the field, we're actually investing a lot in order to demonstrate how this is done. We have a long-term relationship in Europe with many of the organizations that are today present here in this forum to invest in approaches for no tillage or minimum tillage and to understand the consequential effects on the soils. But we also have large-scale programs in other parts of the world that at the moment focusing on degraded land and how to get already degraded lands back into a good production system. And a good example is our Reverter program in Brazil, where we invest in helping farmers to implement integrated livestock and cropping systems in degraded pasture land that is totally underproductive at the moment. And we know that we can increase productivity on this land by at least 50% over the next couple of years. So we committed to actually reverse the degradation on more than 1 million hectares in the next couple of years in our Reverter program. Second area of innovation where we're really looking at to become much more specific is the biodiversity component. We've always invested in biodiversity, but what we've seen is that we need to become much more specific in trying to quantify soil biodiversity and adjacent crop area biodiversity through indicator species and sensors. We have to use the modern IT technology, sensor technology that is developing in order to start detecting biodiversity real time. And what I always like to say, actually, to start democratizing biodiversity measurement, that is at the moment something that only very, very well-trained people can do. And with that, you have a very limited amount of people who can assess biodiversity at scale today. Another example where we are testing and doing is our Live and Grow program that we launched at the FFA a couple of weeks back in order to understand biodiversity as part of an integrating farming system. And in the field, we are demonstrating this with living labs networks with farmers who actually try to push the boundaries between tradition and convention. conventional farming in order to start understanding how these technologies can actually be implemented. One of our biggest programs in this space is at the moment in Germany, with more than 17, so I think it's 20 farmers that participate. And we will show across the geographies of Germany how this new farming can better integrate biodiversity measurements and soil health measurements on the ground at scale and become scalable. Last thing that I think we have to mention is resource efficiency. As said before, we've always focused on resource efficiency, but still we have to continue investing in technology, and in particular, and that's very important within also the challenging European environment, we need to keep on investing in bringing new well-designed molecules and biological compounds for new integrated pest, disease, and weed management solutions into the market. Without these tools, resource efficiency is most likely not achievable, and we've seen that. You can and have to start replacing old technologies with new technologies in order to make it better for the future and keep on innovating in this space. Then you have, of course, other technical innovations like new spray nozzles, combining it with digital tools in order to become much, much more efficient and precise in the application of crop protection products, but also in the seeding technologies to actually use less seeds per square meter through better technologies and higher productive seeds like our hybrids portfolio that is implemented in Europe already. And in the field, of course, we do develop, like many others, much more precise tools to actually assess the sustainability on the farm. Because let's face it, sustainability, regenerative, conservation act, all these are challenges that require lots of data and need to be processed. And we need to find ways to make it easier for farmers to make the right decisions at the right point in time. And we believe through the digital revolution that is ongoing, we can develop this assessment tool, sustainability assessments tool for the farmer that will support the transition to more conservation agricultural systems as we speak. So this is the complex where we are investing. As you can see, it is a lot. It's all under the umbrella of our commitment to keep on spending significant resources in our research and development facilities to move the conservation agriculture agenda forward. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks a lot, Juan. Finally, let's hear from Anke Kwast. Anke, what kind of innovations is Yara International looking at for CA?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dave, and also thank you for inviting me to this very relevant Congress. I will highlight that a lot can be done around climate smart crop nutrition, and also listening to all the speakers, I think we are almost there. We have so many different measures in place, and it's just a question to apply now. It's amazing. So Yara's, let me check. Yara's mission is to responsibly feed the world and protect the planet. And you could say sustainability is somehow part of our DNA. I'm working now since 32 years in Yara, and sustainability was always very high on the agenda in our research programs. And we are addressing all these elements which are listed here, and it's quite a high number in a science-based manner, really studying in depth what we can do with a focus on crop nutrition and including also more and more the water inside our solutions. And basically reducing greenhouse emission and developing climate solutions is the focus of my presentation today. This is a big topic overall, and it has been mentioned before, it's also bigger than Yara. Therefore, we are aiming at partners and joint initiatives to move with speed and scale to actions on the ground together with farmers. And it was also highlighted this morning that the farmers want to be basically the driver of this, and this is very highly appreciated. But we need also the food industry and others who are ready to contribute to make this transition happen. And the food chain has reached the tipping point and is on the road to climate neutrality. And this is critical, as the transformation can only happen if we are all driving it together. So the food industry is owning the interface with the consumer, and they need to respond to the consumer needs and capture the value from it, which then needs to be shared back with all who have contributed to the improvements. And that is a machinery of incentives, which has to be basically up and running before the real move can start and the big transformation can start. And I see that this is now coming. Crop nutrition is a relevant contributor to greenhouse gas emission and food production. So this slide is showing, looking at wheat and potato food chain, we see that 26% of the greenhouse gas emission is coming from production of the crop. And drilling down further to the farming, we see that in wheat, in total, 71% of the emission is related to crop nutrition, with 40% being emitted from the soil during the production and 31% being emitted during the production of the fertilizer. In potato, it's somehow a bit lower, but very similar. So crop nutrition contributes to 60 to 70% of the greenhouse gas emission in crop production, and about half of it is emitted during the production of the fertilizer, and the other half during the use of the fertilizer on the ground. And Yara is addressing both for decarbonization, the food chain. We are doing that with climate smart crop nutrition solutions. And the toolbox consists of improved farmer practice, so basically the knowledge sharing. And here we are addressing the big scale farms, the professional farms, but also the smallholders, because they can contribute a lot also to climate change mitigation. We are including also green and efficient fertilizers, circular economy, and digital solutions, which was mentioned before. It will be a key enabler for the knowledge transfer and the precision agriculture. It's important what fertilizer you are using, as it comes already with a certain carbon load from the production. And Yara is a leading provider of low carbon fertilizers, now taking the next step to green fertilizers. And this graph here compares the carbon footprint of non-EU fertilizers with fertilizers which have been produced in Europe, and they are 50 to 60% lower because they are applying best technologies. And these best applied technologies is based on an N2O abatement catalyst, which reduces the N2O emission in fertilizer production by more than 90%. And this technology was developed first by Yara and then shared to others and is now widely used in Europe. Yara will now invest in green technologies to produce ammonia as of 2023 by using renewable energy, solar, wind, and hydropower. And with this transformation, we expect to reach an additional 80 to 90% reduction of the carbon footprint of green nitrate fertilizer products. It has been mentioned before already that for the climate, it matters how much nitrogen is used to produce a unit of crop. And precision farming is a key enabler to produce more with less. Based on trials, it was demonstrated that the nitrogen use efficiency, which is on average 62% in Europe, can be enhanced further to about 80% by precise split application of highly efficient fertilizers. And for this, tools and services are required, and Yara's developments are designed for high nitrogen use efficiency and the integration of all nutrient inputs to drive overall efficiency. And as was mentioned before, it should be easy to use and really deliver tangible value also to the farmer to have a high adaptation rate. And that is a long journey to go, I have to be honest. We have underestimated the workload which is behind the digitalization, but now we are almost there. And I'm very optimistic that many others are also providing now suitable tools for farmers in future. Also, the nitrogen form matters, as green fertilizers should not contain carbon themselves. Urea will be out of the game in a decarbonized future, as it contains carbon itself. Furthermore, we have found lower N2O emissions with nitrates in many production systems. And here's an example of winter wheat, where the N2O emission from arable land at moderate soil moisture was measured. The overall level of emission is quite low as compared to the IPCC factor of 1%, as you can see here. But however, nitrates contributed to lower emission than urea. And this can be explained by the fact that there is a natural microbial activity going on in the soil to transform urea to nitrates. And that is also a source of N2O emission. And by applying nitrates directly, we can bypass this transformation and therefore also reduce emissions in these conditions. Currently, decision support systems are under development to select the right nitrogen form for the specific fields and crops, because a lot can be done also on that level. There's another interesting topic related to the N form, which deserves more attention. Because nitrates are non-acidifying nitrogen forms, and that has impact on the soil acidification, which can be very critical for the carbon sequestration. And as we can see on this example from Brazil, the organic matter content increased with the nitrate share from around 12 to 16 grams per cubic centimeter of soil. So in order to enhance the carbon sequestration in agriculture, nutrient management is a critical enabler. A lot of activities are now ongoing on the ground to implement all the solutions, and I think we can do even much more. And this is just one example, a pilot to establish the first carbon-free food chain together. Lantmännen in Sweden is owning this initiative, and Yara is part of this pilot. On the slide, you see the greenhouse gas inventory, quantifying all contributing elements. And the different elements will be then addressed by the different contributors in that chain. And Yara is addressing the crop nutrition related elements with green fertilizer and also their climate smart use. Another initiative is the Agoro Carbon Alliance, which enables and supports farmers in generating and selling carbon credits. This can be, for example, achieved by moving to conservation agriculture practices. And by this, we will contribute to the transformation to reduced farming emissions and also higher carbon sequestration via no-till cover crops and nitrogen optimization. So, to conclude, let's decarbonize the food chain together. And I see that we have a lot of measures already in place. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks very much, Anke. So I wanted to ask you guys about a topic that came up in our previous panel with farmers, and that is mechanization. Klaus, let me put this question to you. We heard from the farmers their thoughts on how CA intersects with mechanization. From the company perspective, what role will mechanization play in increasing sustainable agriculture development, and particularly with the use of CA, particularly for different sizes of farms? What role is mechanization having there?
Yeah, I think mechanization along with digitalization will have a super important role to achieve all those targets. I think Anke has nicely laid it out. We see a significant opportunity to reduce inputs. I think it's the most important thing. It's reducing fertilizers. It's also reducing crop protection. I think this will be explored in the coming years. I think the technology is there. How it lands in the different geographies also depends on the regulatory frameworks. It comes back to the very important question on data ownership. I think there's still discussion needed, but for me, mechanization and digitalization are the key levers in the next 10 years to bring agriculture to the next dimension of sustainability.
Jerome, obviously you're a good person to ask about this. What's your take on where mechanization fits in here?
Well, there are different levels, as was already explained. I think there is first a number of things that are possible now that were not possible in the past. But if you look at the whole evolution of the way mechanization has supported agriculture, it is explaining how the potential has been also explored. But that's why I ended on data. We're at a level where yes, you can still invent a number of things in mechanization, hopefully, and there's still a lot that can be developed, and we love that innovative part that our industry has. But we will need to have a smart usage of the data, because more and more it is how we integrate all the different operations into the system and make use of data, make value added out of data, which would maybe not have a lot of sense if we just take the pieces of data, the zeros and the ones individually. Now, finding a way to do this where it's a win-win-win situation and it's not, misuse of data or mistrust, or this is why we have invested. It's not in a couple of weeks that the chain came up with this voluntary code of conduct, and it had the fertilizer industry, it had the crop protection, it had the farmers, it had the cooperatives, it had the contractors, it basically had everybody involved. And it took us about 2 years to get there, because without this common understanding that can then be replicated in the contractual arrangements, without the ability to use the data, we're going to miss the real opportunity that we have in front of us. Now, as it was also said, I think in the conversations today, the framework in which we operate also has a big impact. I'm getting a little bit out of my comfort zone of mechanization, but if we don't trust science, if we don't allow innovation globally to do what it can bring to the chain, if we don't allow or if we allow legislators to come forward with innovations or on their own as legislators without having an impact assessment conducted of the impact of those great ideas or targets that are put forward, we're going to miss the opportunity also. And I say opportunity, but let's never forget that the real reason why we're here is to feed the people in a safe way with enough safe and nutritious food. There's going to be more of us, so we have to find ways to deliver that. And it's something that we have always to have in mind when we discuss choices and the way we do agriculture for the future.
Juan, same question to you. What role do you see for mechanization in going hand in hand with CA?
Yeah, look, I think mechanization is just a means to an end. I think you have to first discuss what is the end that we are trying to achieve here. And we're talking about less disturbance of the soils in order to improve the soil health and the water retention capacities. With that comes a totally different way of weed and pest and disease pressures that need to be done. And it is not as straightforward and easy for the farmer to just switch from one system to another, as we all know, because it's a knowledge-based system. So mechanization can help with that. But I'm with Jerome. I think a lot to do it has also a lot to do with the knowledge management and the decision support system. And for that, you need a combination of data or digital solutions in the space for the decision-making process, and then maybe the automatization and mechanization in order to make it happen. But one more element that I think is quite important, we shouldn't just think about the developed agricultural systems where mechanization is easy or easier integrated. We also need to think about how to bring mechanization into smaller field sizes, into smallholder markets. And just one common tool that we use in our agricultural system in Europe quite frequently, if conservation agricultural methods are applied, are direct seeders, for example. High precision direct seeders. How can you minimize them? How can you make them fit for small markets? How can you actually do that? And we're working in India at the moment with a small company that calls themselves the Happy Seeders, and we're trying to do that. So we we have to look into mechanization options for all sizes of farm if we want to move the conservation agenda forward. And you need this integrated thinking in order to make that happen.
Anke, what's your take on this role of mechanization?
Yeah, I think that agriculture is still a lot physical work, and I see that we are probably, there is no way to bypass mechanization. I mean, digitalization is an add-on, but we need good machinery, and we will be surprised to see what potential we are losing today by stuff which we can fix also with the machinery. So we should not stop to work on machinery, but we should make them more intelligent, that they talk to each other, and that they are definitely also talking to us and listening to us. I think that is critical. So we are going the next step, but on the go, we have to make sure that we are also driving the mechanization further, because there's still a lot of potential, as I believe. It's still physical work on the ground, and this can be done in different qualities.
Well, I asked the farmers in the previous panel about the regulatory framework in their individual countries. So I wanted to ask you guys as well. I mean, you guys are operating in a number of different geographies generally. So I wonder if there is a big difference in the political landscape across the world when it comes to CA, and I wonder which countries are more receptive, which countries are less receptive. And then I'd also like to hear from you guys what you need from policymakers in terms of really spreading the use of CA. Klaus, let's go to you first. How does the political receptiveness vary in the various geographies that you operate in?
I think we always like to make it a regional difference, like the European Union is different from the Americas, which is definitely true. But even inside the European Union, I think we have very different approaches to innovation. I have to say that I was in two subsequent panel conversations 2 years ago. The first one in the Netherlands, totally focusing on innovation. And the German conversation a week later, much more focusing on regulation. For me, very interesting experience, I have to say. Whatever, I think in all geographies, we see in different ways with different priorities, strong support to change the agricultural system. If you go to India or if you go to Asia, in some countries, there are problems which are much more pressing for the people on the ground at this point of time. Could be water, for example, that in those countries, water is seen as a more important topic than climate change. In the Americas, I would say the opportunities for us from a regulatory perspective are in that sense different, that this is much more a voluntary market development of carbon credits when compared to the European Union, where we will see regulation much earlier trying to frame this whole thing up. For me, it's important that we go in every country and see what the opportunities are and make the right connections, make the right decisions, make the right discussions with the right stakeholders to see what is needed in the country. And one thing we cannot forget, which is something I really want to say, there's always trade-offs, right? I mean, you bring a technology, you replace it by another technology, there's almost always a trade-off. I think what we want to land on in the future is a system which is looking at the entire ecosystem on the farm. Carbon is only one element of a much broader ecosystem where water, biodiversity, soil health and other elements have to be integrated as well. In some geography, water might be more important today than carbon. In another geography, carbon might be much more important today than water or biodiversity. But in the end of the day, we should all aim for that ecosystem which is incentivized to the best possible way. So it's a long answer to a short question. There's very different environments in different geographies. Some are much more setting on voluntary initiatives, others are setting more on regulation. We know as an industry, we have the responsibility to make the best possible offers and to opt for innovation, because I believe that's key.
Jerome, does this sound similar to your experience with agricultural machinery? And also, what do you need from policymakers right now?
Well, thank you for the question. Indeed, it is what we're hearing. But I would stress 2 points, basically, on top of what has been said. The first one, and I already mentioned it earlier, is it's great to have targets. It's great to focus on the number of choices that we're making in Europe or in other parts of the world. But until we have a comprehensive impact assessment that cumulates all those targets and looks at the result on the system, we're a little bit in the dark. So I think that's the first thing I would call on our legislators, is to make sure that when we make choices, and there's again nothing wrong with those choices, we also have a good understanding of the cumulative effects of all the bits and pieces of those choices. Because if we don't have that, then it's a bit difficult to look forward and to get organized. The second thing I would stress, and I think we just had a clear demonstration of this on this panel today, is we have a lot of available solutions, technological solutions, mechanical solutions, but also chemicals and progress. But how do we incentivize the uptake? How do we make it interesting for young people to get into farming and to make the investments to move forward, so that we have that as a new generation of farmers? I'm very worried by some of the numbers we see in Europe, and I'm very worried by the expectations on one hand, but the lack of maybe willingness or attractiveness for the sector. So incentivize the uptake of the technologies, make it also available and possible through the networks. It's great to have machinery that can talk to each other and to suppliers and to everything. But if you're left in the middle of the field with no signal, because the connection is not there, then it takes a little bit of the excitement away. Can you hear me now? So uptake and impact assessments.
Juan, when it comes to the geographies that Syngenta operates in, what are the differences you notice?
I don't want to go into region badging or anything in this direction. I think there's I think two distinct ways on looking at regulation. I think if we want to move the agenda forward fast and at scale, we need regulation that actually enables innovation in this space, rather than stopping it or making it painful to make any transition. I'll give you a concrete example. You know, I mentioned in my introduction the farmer network that we have in Germany. And they're implementing soil conservation and biodiversity measures on farm, and we want to measure the impact. For the farmers to actually be allowed to plant a field margin, they need a license. They need to ask the local bureau for the environment to get the license to plant something else than the crop. If you want to take soil samples in the field, like insect samples, you need a license, because it's also regulated who is allowed to take insect samples and who is not allowed to take insect samples, and somebody authorizes it. So you're actually stopping the transformation just by over-regulating something that probably doesn't need to be regulated. With an insecticide, that would be okay. So you're okay to kill your insects, but you're not okay. That gives you an example on how regulation is actually stopping the transformation that is most likely happening. What we would need, and I think this is a global ask, and I don't make it regional specific. What we would need is regulated markets for nature, regulated markets for carbon, regulated markets that go beyond the only thing that is at the moment functioning as a market, and that's the crop. A farmer has to invest in any transformation, and in order to make this investment viable, he needs a return on that investment. And if only one market is really paying, the one for the crop, you will always prioritize the crop, the yield, versus all the other things that we have to balance out. That's what slows down this whole thing. If we would have a true regulated market for carbon, for example, or soil conservation, or biodiversity, or nature, call it whatever you want in this conservation space, you would actually start generating a tradable good that is truly tradable, and not like at the moment with most of the carbon markets just based on voluntary one-to-one relationships. You know that you have a project, you oversee the project, you apply a protocol, and then you find a buyer for that service. It's a one-to-one relationship. It's not an open market like the one with the crops. So a good regulatory system that would enable nature trading, basically, would actually accelerate a lot the transformation that is necessary, because you would have more than one true income stream for what is produced on a limited amount of land that has to produce all the services. So a bit provocative maybe, but as I say, we need to look at it totally different and need enabling regulation rather than prohibiting regulation.
Anke, would you agree with that? What are you looking for from policymakers?
Yeah, I think it's music to my ears, to be honest. Many important things have been raised. I want to add one other topic here, and that is in agriculture. We are facing basically the challenge that we need to bring available knowledge and technologies and translate them to the different farmers and farmer segments. And this is already quite an exercise, I can tell you, especially if you go to digital solutions. You have to break it down to the local conditions of the farmer, to the language, and then suddenly you discover that that policymakers can add quite a new level of complexity to this, and then suddenly there are changing regulations and you have to adapt all your tools again and again. So instead of adding more complexity to it, it would be fantastic if policymakers could aim to harmonize this on the ground where it can be harmonized, so that we can scale up and have also the confidence that the investments we are doing today will not be obsolete tomorrow, because there are changes on the ground we have to adapt and again. So that is, I think, especially for the digitalization, it's very important that, because we are creating a global infrastructure, otherwise it's just too expensive to do that only for one segment. And I think the other topic is the confidence, especially when you think about the green fertilizer. This will be an enormous investment into a future technology. And you need to give confidence to this private sector that there will be a return of investment of these investments long term. So I think this confidence, either by incentive frameworks or by regulations, has to come from somewhere. Otherwise, we are losing time and we can't afford that for the sake of climate. I think that is very important. Put the incentives on the right things and then drive for it.
Makes sense. Well, we've gotten some questions from the audience. I can put those to you guys now. Let's take a first question. This is from Jeffrey Wanjala. It's a question to you, Anke. So, Anke, when you said a fertilizer is more acidifying or less acidifying to the soil, what are the specific fertilizer ingredients that we can peg the soil acidification to?
So there is one wonderful product, it's calcium nitrate, the Yara Liva product range of Yara, which is non-acidifying. And that is because it contains nitrate, and nitrate is not acidifying. If it's then also compared with calcium, that's a fantastic product. The availability worldwide is not sufficient, but if you apply ammonium or urea, then you have an acidifying effect by the end form directly. So that is critical to know.
Great.
But just to add on, we can also add liming components to our fertilizers, and that is also a fantastic idea. The non-acidifying fertilizer, which is available in big scale, where we put basically the liming requirement physically inside the same product, so that the more you use, the more lime will be there automatically. I think this is a fantastic concept, especially for smallholders who are not having access to lime. This could be a fantastic way to intensify production in a sustainable manner.
So our next question comes from Turi Felicia. It's for Jerome. So Jerome, you talked about more people to feed, less farmers engaged, more mechanization, more precision agriculture. Does this all mean that we're moving away from small-scale agriculture? Is it inevitable?
No, definitely not. And I think we have to accept that more and more we will have different types of agriculture out there, and there's nothing wrong with having them working, side by side next to each other. at the end of the day, we still need to feed the people, and we need to have a responsibility to this from a global perspective. So mechanization should not be seen as, only for big farms and big exploitations. There's actually a lot that can be done on a very small scale. And to me, frankly, the jury is still out if we're going to have larger machines, smaller machines, fleets of machines. For sure, we will have mechanization, smarter, more autonomous, and working more and more as a system using this data that we talked about as the way to basically change divisions and move into the new world of real smart agriculture, doing only what is needed with the best certainty possible in order to have safe and nutritious food for everybody.
Does anyone else have thoughts on this? I mean, do all of these things we've been talking about, both in terms of the challenges and the solutions, are they all pointing toward a trend toward less small-scale agriculture? Klaus?
I mean, the reality is that most of the farmers in the world are smallholder farmers, and if you are in Germany and your key contacts are maybe in the US, then you see a certain part of agriculture, but you don't see the major part of agriculture, which is in Asia or in Africa on smallholder scale. And I think I would completely agree with the others. This is not about driving this to big or small, and I would also agree. I don't know where we finally land. As a reality of today, we must help the smallholders, and we must help them with technologies which are adopted to their needs. While I completely see that this will include digitalization, we will see a lot more drone applications in Asia, for example. What could help is eventually that there is some professionalization in the application coming in. There are concepts like the sprayman concepts which could help, where we can also make a significant move towards even improving responsibility and sustainability in the terms of using the tools. But if we don't support the smallholder farmers, we leave out a huge part of agriculture and leave it behind, and we cannot do this.
Anke, you raised your hand?
Yes, because I mean, if you see the trend, you see that there is a trend towards more bigger farms and less farmers, and that we see globally. And there's a reason for it. It's an economy of scale, and I think this is probably something we have to reflect about. What will be, what framework do we want to put in place? Because I mean, if you have only the economic drivers, this will be the future. And you mentioned more than 1/3 of farmers are above 65 or something. What is the result? The youngsters are not attracted to the framework. And on top, I think the biodiversity aspect has to be addressed further. If we see these very big scale agriculture systems, we have to establish something smart which enables the degree of biodiversity we will need to be sustainable. And this is not possible in having one landscape with one crop. I think we have also to think about the scale of fields and how the landscape should be designed in future. That's much more important than the number of farmers. And we have to establish a framework which is enabling both a good livelihood of farmers and a biodiversity.
Juan, you wanted to come in on this as well?
Yeah, look, I think it is indeed the wrong question, because it's not about the farm mare and its holding size. It is about the management unit that you need to actually manage in a more regenerative conservation way. And I believe that already today, the measurement unit, at least in the best systems, is far smaller than a field, because you actually have different application rates of fertilizer, different application rates of pesticides, even depending on the need on different places of your field. So it's about the size of that management unit that you need for a very resource efficient way of managing the land, and that should apply to big and small farms. The challenge will be to Jerome to provide machinery that is that flexible, that actually is then applicable also on the smaller sizes. But I think the future will tell if this shouldn't be possible with all the drone developments that we're having and smaller machines and robots that are developing in this environment. But again, the critical question is the management size, and that will always be smaller than a large farm, definitely a large field. It is within a square meter unit in an idle place.
Well, I have a question for Jerome now, actually from the audience. So this question comes from Victor Molabe from South Africa. He asks, how possible and cost effective is the conversion of conversational equipment to smart and precision equipment?
Ooh, that's a difficult question because we are focused on the European Union, so I'm not sure I can take into account all the different conditions in the world. But indeed, it is an evolution that we're seeing on the machinery. It's clear that some of the equipment is getting more and more complex, and integrating all the technologies, of course, doesn't come overnight. So there's a cost to it. There is an understanding of that cost versus the value added. But there's also the skills dimension that I really want to stress out. And this we see firsthand in the EU. Don't get me wrong, from a global perspective. It is not an easy transformation to do, and it's not something where you try it on Monday, and if it doesn't work on Tuesday, you can still change on Wednesday. It is a transformation that is calling for a lot of reflection, and that's why I'm talking of incentives and how do we make sure that the farmers, the contractors have a role also to play in that. How do we make sure that we can demonstrate the value added with the new types of equipment, with the new types of farming, with conservation agriculture, so that people in the end see that, yes, there's value added in doing it this way, and can then more and more being on the side of the supporters. I'll just say an additional word on contractors, for example. We know, for an example, when there's a new type of machinery that comes in, and when it may represent a quite big investment, trying the new technology 1 or 2 years in a row with the services of contractors, or seeing it work in the field next door, is usually one of the best ways of converting to the implementation of that technology. So we should not also forget about the different elements that we have in the whole chain between the farmer and the consumer, so that we can bring in those new technologies.
Well, we have another question here. I'm going to put this to Klaus. This question is from Mina Devkota. There is a lot of concern about the use of glyphosate for CA. Is there any effort from Bayer or Syngenta to make available other safe herbicides in the replacement for glyphosate?
I mean, I couldn't follow the entire conversation in the morning, but I know that there were farmers commenting that without glyphosate at the moment, conservation agriculture will have a huge problem. So it's a yes and it's a yes and no answer. So I believe that at this point of time, glyphosate is one of the most important tools for conservation agriculture. While at the same time, I can only say yes, we are of course constantly working and looking into new options. The way we are looking today into finding new chemistry is very different from like 25 years ago. We are looking for very efficient molecules, but at the same time, we are looking for molecules with an excellent safety profile. But I can tell you, because I'm a chemist and I've been working in fungicide research for quite a long time and also in regulatory affairs later, it's a definite challenge to find a molecule with better properties than glyphosate from a pure scientific point of view, because indeed it has a really good safety profile, and there's many molecules around which need more stewardship from a safety perspective. So yes, we are working on it, but at this point of time, I think glyphosate is a major part of an efficient conservation agriculture.
Juan, since Syngenta was also mentioned in the question, I'll give you a chance to respond as well.
Well, I think I'm with Klaus here. I think what we need is a mix of tools. And I wouldn't actually just focus on a single molecule. the fact that we don't have more products out there is also due to the fact that it's actually quite complicated to bring innovation into the markets these days. And it's not getting any easier from day to day because regulation is getting tougher and tougher. And yeah, at the moment, there's no alternative that is cost effective to this molecule. And once it's gone, basically you have difficulties with weed management. I'm convinced that with better technologies, we will get into a more integrated weed management future, but time will tell if this becomes real and we really will find a solution that works as efficient as the existing solutions.
Well, I'm going to put two more questions to you guys. They're both kind of technical, so I hope you can figure them out because I'm not entirely sure. So the first question comes from Roberto from our previous panel, the farmer in Argentina. So he asks, what is the role you attribute to biological N fixation by legume nodulation and from soil-free living organisms activity? I don't know what that means. Does anyone? It's very technical. It's over my head. Anyone wants to jump in?
Before I think Anke is most likely the best position to answer, but I can give it because I talked about biostimulants.
I mean, it's that the natural nitrogen fixation by microorganisms. Either they are connected to the crop directly, like you find it in soybean, for example, or free living organisms. This is a very interesting approach to bring nitrogen into the soil, and it's also good to have these crops somehow integrated into the crop rotation. So that's a very smart way to increase soil fertility. You need also a specific crop nutrition for these crops, so it's not that you can stop all kind of nutrition. You have to bring them also what they require, and that is also a specific requirement. But on top, this will be not sufficient for the level of productivity we are aiming at this moment on the ground to feed the world. So it will be an integrated part, and it should also be an integrated part of you could say, sustainable crop management. But we should also be realistic. And some people think then we don't need any synthetic fertilizer anymore. We have already today a lot of legumes in the crop rotations, and still half of our human being protein is coming from synthetically produced nitrogen fertilizer. So we should be realistic. But everything we can do to make sure that there is an additional inflows into agriculture via circular products, via leguminous, that's all welcome.
Okay, and our last question comes from Jeffrey Wanjala. So when speaking of intercropping as a CA enabler, do we have any post-emergence selective herbicide for maize, soybean, or maize common bean intercrop? Who would like to take that? Does this mean we don't have any? Klaus?
Honestly, I'm sure we have. The problem, I'm not a herbicide super specialist, so I think those selective herbicides exist. As Juan said, that's a cost game to a certain extent. So, I mean, there's different opportunities in that space, how to operate. You can spray around your crops, only on the weeds. Maybe in the future with precision application, there are much better opportunities than today, which I think is true. Or you have herbicide tolerant traits, of course, which enables you to avoid that problem. Those herbicides exist, but that's what I tried to say before. There's always a trade-off between different technologies, and there's always advantages and disadvantages, and that can give me maybe the last word on glyphosate. I would appreciate in the future if we have a conversation, a societal debate on what tools do we like to see in agriculture, chemistry, biology, breeding. I think the best we can do is really sit together and compare those tools side by side and discuss openly about the advantages and the disadvantages of each of those and have an open conversation. that's the only thing actually I really want to see, because we are innovation companies. We can go in different directions, but preferably in reasonable directions.
Well, that seems like a good place to leave it. Thank you so much to our panelists for some great insights and some really great presentations of what you guys are up to. I thought that was quite interesting in terms of what's going on and what's envisioned for the future. So thank you for that.